part of the theory correct?
You know it well. The sun's radiation comes in the form of light waves, and that heats up the Earth. And then some of the radiation that is absorbed and warms the Earth is re-radiated back into space in the form of infrared radiation. And some of the outgoing infrared radiation is trapped by this layer of atmosphere and held inside the atmosphere. And that's a good thing because it keeps the temperature of the Earth within certain boundaries, keeps it relatively constant and livable. But the problem is this thin layer of atmosphere is being thickened by all of the global warming pollution that's being put up there. And what that does is it thickens this layer of atmosphere. More of the outgoing infrared is trapped. And so the atmosphere heats up worldwide. That's global warming.
That is what should happen if carbon dioxide was really causing global warming. The problem is, that is not what's happening in the real world. Scientists interviewed by Channel 4 in London, England, explain why.
If it's greenhouse warming, you get more warming in the middle of the troposphere, the first 10, 12 kilometers of the atmosphere, than you do at the surface. There are good theoretical reasons for that, having to do with how the greenhouse works.
All the models, every one of them, calculates that the warming should be faster as you go up from the surface into the atmosphere. And in fact, the maximum warming over the equator should take place at an altitude of about 10 kilometers.
So instead of increasing the temperature gradient, which would cause more frequent and severe storms and hurricanes, the global warming theory states that the gradient should decline, thereby decreasing, not increasing, the frequency and the severity of storms and hurricanes.
What we found consistently is that in a great part of the planet, that the bulk of the atmosphere is not warming as much as we see at the surface in this region. And that's a real head scratcher for us because the theory is pretty straightforward. And the theory says that if the surface warms, the upper atmosphere should warm rapidly. The rise in temperature of that part of the atmosphere is not very dramatic at all and really does not match the theory that climate models are expressing at this point.
That is, the observations do not show an increase with altitude. In fact, most observations show a slight decrease in the rate of warming with altitude. So in a sense, you can say that the hypothesis of man-made global warming is falsified by the evidence.
Man-caused global warming proponents also claim that because the North Pole is melting, polar bears are threatened with extinction. However, numerous studies have shown that all but one of the many polar bear populations are stable or increasing. Polar bears have managed to survive just fine through many other periods in the past 10,000 years in which it was much warmer than even the most pessimistic global warming predictions today. But what about the Antarctic and Greenland? Won't their melting cause massive shoreline flooding?
It's considered relatively more stable, however, than another big body of ice that's roughly the same size. Greenland would also raise sea level almost 20 feet if it went. If Greenland broke up and melted, or if half of Greenland and half of West Antarctica broke up and melted, this is what would happen to the sea level in Florida. This is what would happen to San Francisco Bay. A lot of people live in these areas.
Even the highly political United Nations IPCC states in their 2007 summary for policymakers that the most that will happen by the 21st century is 59 centimeters or 23 inches. The only possible reason that Al Gore would use such a blatant distortion of truth would be to create a sense of raw fear in the video's viewers. Tragically, the inconvenient truth has been repeatedly shown to thousands of naive elementary and high school students who have little to no basis to judge the merits of what they're watching. Not only is Al Gore's assessment extremely exaggerated, but there is compelling evidence that many parts of Antarctica are getting colder, and the center of Greenland's ice cap is actually growing, not melting. The evidence for Greenland is quite dramatic. On July 15, 1942, two B-17 Flying Fortresses and 6 P-38 Lightnings flying from the United States to England were forced to make an emergency landing on Greenland's southern ice cap. The crew was rescued, but the planes were left on the ice. In 1988, Pat Epps and Richard Taylor led a team to find these missing planes. They expected to find them within 40 feet of the surface. They did not. After several years of failure, the planes were finally found in 1992, 1 mile from the landing site and 268 feet below the ice surface. The team used hot water to dig a tunnel down to one of the planes to extract it. Dubbed the Glacier Girl, the plane was restored and is now flying again. The planes did not sink to a depth of 268 feet, nor did the glacier push them down to that depth. If that were the case, the planes would have been ripped apart. Rather, 268 feet of ice accumulated on them from 1941 to 1992. Although the results are complex, other research shows that much of Greenland's interior ice cap is growing and only its edges are melting. In balance, there is only a slight decline for the entire continent. Al Gore ignores all this and concentrates instead on the melting that is occurring on the edges of Greenland.
10 years later, this is what happened. And here's the melting from 2005.
Should we be alarmed about this melting? 800 years ago, the Earth was considerably warmer than it is today. The Vikings settled in southern Greenland and prospered in an agrarian culture. That period is known as the medieval optimal or medieval warm period, and the Vikings grew crops where much of the melting is occurring today. By 1400, when the temperature was about what it is today, the climate had become so cold that the Vikings had to abandon many of their settlements. If these same Vikings were here today, they would undoubtedly tell us that this warming is not such a bad thing.
When the Vikings were sailing in Arctic waters, and when the Vikings were farming in Greenland in soil that's now permanently frozen, the question is then what caused that warming? It certainly wasn't human-produced CO2.
The answer may be in the sun. It has been known for centuries that there is a relationship between the number of sunspots and the Earth's temperature. The more sunspots, the warmer the Earth's temperature. It has recently been determined that the more sunspots there are, the more energy the sun emits. However, the increased energy is not sufficient to account for the warming of the Earth. That discovery encouraged the theory that the sun could not cause the warming and that carbon dioxide must be the driving force. While direct changes in solar energy output may not be sufficient to cause the warming, there seems to be other factors at work. It has been known for some time that there is a high correlation between the length of the solar cycle and the Earth's temperature. An emerging theory seems to fit all the data and offers a far better explanation for the current warming than greenhouse gases. It has been known since the 20th century that there appears to be a correlation between cosmic radiation and low elevation cloudiness. The more cosmic radiation, the more cloud formation. Several Danish scientists led by Hendrik Sevensmark confirmed that relation in the early 1990s and found the correlation to be highly significant. They then developed a working hypothesis. When a sun goes supernova, it emits a burst of cosmic radiation. As that radiation reaches the Earth thousands of years later, it interacts with atmospheric atoms and frees electrons, which then act to bring water vapor molecules together, which finally condenses out into water droplets in the lower atmosphere, which creates clouds. Low elevation clouds are highly reflective and reflect the sun's energy back out into space. The more clouds, the more sun is reflected, and the less solar energy actually gets to the Earth to warm it, and the Earth's temperature drops. As long as the cosmic rays are bombarding the Earth in high amounts, there will be greater cloud formation, greater solar reflectance, and cooler global temperatures. However, as the sun becomes more active with solar flares and other activity, plasma made up of charged particles of mainly electrons and protons called solar winds stream out from the sun. While this has many effects on the Earth, it keeps more of the cosmic radiation from reaching the Earth and other planets, thereby reducing cloud formation. With fewer low-altitude clouds, more of the sun's energy reaches the Earth's surface where it causes heating and a warming Earth. The effect is huge. In just 5 years, it can cause a 2% decrease in clouds, which in turn equates to an increase in surface warming equivalent to about 85% of what is claimed for all carbon dioxide warming since the Industrial Revolution. In addition, Mars and other planets in the solar system also appear to be experiencing global warming, just like Earth. Although the theory is in hot debate within the scientific community, this evidence supports the solar-caused global warming theory and further weakens the carbon dioxide greenhouse gas theory. Elevated levels of carbon dioxide may not be as harmful as Al Gore and other man-caused global warming proponents would have us believe. In fact, there is strong evidence that elevated carbon dioxide may be very beneficial, something that we are never told.
I mean, CO2 has been part of the planetary atmosphere since the first day this Earth evolved. And the plants and virtually everything we see evolved in a period of time when the CO2 level was very much higher than it is today. CO2 is something the plants love. They take up CO2, they use it, they give out oxygen. We take the oxygen and give out CO2. So it's hardly a pollutant at all. It's quite a naturally occurring gas that appears in our atmosphere and is very important to sustaining life on this Earth.
In terms of the broad geological perspective, the carbon dioxide concentration of the atmosphere right now is low. Almost all the plants that we live with and depend upon for food evolved in an atmosphere when the CO2 was higher in the atmosphere, much higher than it is today, and higher than we could possibly get it